We have recently done some research and some review of our own appeal service within SENAC. So our appeal service has been going since 2017. So I'm going to take you through now some of the findings, just a summary of the findings. Obviously there's quite a lot more. So I'm just going to take you through some of our findings, and hopefully it will resonate with some of you. You may have already sort of experienced a lot of this, or there may, as I said, there may be issues that are missing that you would want to make us aware of. So first of all, sort of the reasons why we decided to do a review and decided to do a survey of parents alongside that as well. The first thing is that the Education Authority and the Department of Education are currently going through a process of reforming the SEND processes. They're putting in place a kind of a SEND improvement plan over the next couple of years. So this is about the more information that we can send to them about the sort of the parental experience and the experience that everybody goes through in terms of trying to get the support for their child. I think it's very important that we keep that information going through to the Education Authority and keep talking to them and keep sharing everybody's experiences with them. So this is just another means of us doing this, and it was really to concentrate on the appeal process, which is obviously one of the key mechanisms that we have within the appeal process to get the support for the child. So that was kind of the main reason for doing that. We wanted to highlight the issues and the practices that are actually putting up barriers maybe to the children getting the support they need through the appeal process. And as I say, just to continue to strengthen parents' voices and everyone's opinions, to share that with the Education Authority, so that they're really kind of they're having to listen more and more to the various stakeholders, and they are now in the last year, so they are definitely listening more to everyone. So it's just to encourage that continuous sharing of information and experience. And obviously we want to offer some recommendations in terms of how we might improve the process itself and also improve the parental experience of the process. So that was kind of the main rationale for us doing a review and doing the survey we did. So as I say, our appeal service has been going since 2017, and we looked at 315 appeals from then until sort of the middle of this year, just to do a quick review of sort of the cases that we've taken in terms of the trends and the sort of the issues that came through. So 65% of the appeals that we have supported were on refusal to statutory assess. 31% were related to final statements, and only 4% of that was related to school placements. What we used was obviously as I say, our case review, testimonials and feedback from parents that we supported, and also we did an online parent survey, which some of you here today might have also taken part in, and that was sort of live for about 10 weeks through July, August and slightly into September. And then we also consulted with our own appeals and advocacy team and a smaller number of legally qualified practitioners who also have experience of appeals. So what we found was sort of the most common experience that parents would have shared with us in terms of going through the appeal process. And obviously it's this kind of experience that sort of shows it is a very daunting process for parents. So it's very important to really make the Education Authority really aware of how much it takes for a parent to actually go through an appeal process, and to put greater responsibility onto them to actually make that a more positive process as opposed to the kind of daunting process that it is at the minute. So you'd be very familiar, I'm sure, with some of these concerns that were expressed to us. Obviously, the most common kind of descriptors that was used in terms of the overall process was it was very intimidating and it was very stressful. And of course, as is common through a lot of the work that we all do in terms of SEND provision, that it's perceived as a real fight that you have to go through to get the support that your child needs. Some of the main difficulties were in terms of contacting Education Authority officers and the SEN officers, and in the communication with them, that they were not available, and communication sometimes can be very difficult with them. The information that they provide can be quite confusing, at times even quite misleading in terms of the information they give, and there's a lot of jargon used, and of course a lot of the documentation that comes through in terms of the appeal process, unfortunately, is full of a lot of jargon because it can be quite legalistic, all of it. Again, you know, it's unfortunate to hear this, that when parents do eventually get hold of EA officers, that they feel that they're not really being listened to, and as I say, there was a quote there that they felt that they were being talked down to. So that's, you know, that's something that we would want to see improving in terms of that sort of frontline kind of customer service that the EA are providing there as a public authority. And there was also some feeling about the lack of support from schools whenever a parent was appealing, that the school really was not supporting the parent's appeal and was really, you know, just weren't interested at times. Again, that lack of empathy and understanding, not just of the child's circumstances and what the child is going through and what the child is lacking in terms of support, but also in terms of what the parent is going through. That was shared with us quite a lot, that they felt there was no empathy or understanding from, particularly from the Education Authority again, about what the parent was going through and the tremendous responsibility it can be to take forward an appeal. In terms of kind of improving that, obviously it was about trying to build that more collaborative approach, and obviously more discussion and more opportunity to have actual constructive discussion with the Education Authority prior to and after the appeal is lodged. Because of course you must remember that even when you lodge an appeal, you can continue to talk to the EA throughout the whole way through it, right up to the point of hearing. So it's important to be able to have, you know, increased opportunity to do that, and that will be constructive rather than the kind of experience that is being described here. Also the sort of the responsibility and the task of meeting the requirements of the process. That's in terms of drafting your notice of appeal and the case statement and preparing for the hearing. There is a lot of guidance in that, as I say, on the Department of Justice website, and of course to get support and information from organisations like ourselves is always useful. And also the Tribunal Secretariat is there as well to help advise parents and give them information. So it is quite a task to do that. But I would say that, you know, when you are going through the process, just take it one step at a time. Don't be overwhelmed by kind of the notion of the whole process. Just go through it one step at a time. And that, I think, makes it a wee bit more manageable to take it in different steps like that. So just to look at the sort of the two most common sort of appeal rights that would be part of the sort of the appeals that we have supported, would be the right in terms of refusal to do a statutory assessment and the Education Authority refused to assess, and also in terms of the final statement. So in terms of refusal to assess, one of the main sort of concerns was the high incidence of appeals that the Education Authority initially turned down in respect of requests for statutory assessment, and then weeks later, whenever there is an appeal lodged, they will immediately reverse that decision and initiate the assessment. Now, while that sounds, you know, very positive, and it is very positive that on the appeal they have looked again at the evidence, and they will then concede and will go ahead and do the assessment. What is worrying about that is that in a lot of the majority of cases that we have, there's no new evidence has been submitted at the time of lodging the appeal. So the appeal has been lodged on exactly the same evidence that has already been considered by the Education Authority. So that kind of tells you that that evidence was satisfactory in the first place to meet that threshold for statutory assessment. So that kind of brings up questions about the means in which the Education Authority make the decision not to assess. So that's kind of the main concern around the refusal to assess, that there perhaps isn't the appropriate consideration of the evidence in the first place. And that was kind of a similar experience that came through in the online survey. Whenever that happens, when that practice happens where you get a refusal to assess and then you lodge your appeal, and then the actually concede and say, yes, we will do the assessment, and they initiate the assessment, that in overall that's causing unnecessary delay in the process. So we would be asking for them to really look at how those decisions are made, what criteria is used to determine whether or not they need to do a statutory assessment. And at the minute, they generally use the Education Authority statutory assessment panels, but there's really a tremendous lack of information available about those panels. So we would be asking for more transparency and information about how those decisions are made. So that would be one of the key things that we would be asking the Education Authority for, to actually update. There is some information available on the criteria for statutory assessment, but it really is quite old in terms of when it was published. So we would be asking for update on that information, on how exactly they have a duty to determine whether or not it is necessary for the Education Authority to make an assessment. That's what the legislation tells them, but they will use additional criteria in order for them to make that determination. So we would want to know how that is made, how the evidence is looked at and evaluated, and what is the actual criteria they use to decide whether or not to do a statutory assessment, and why do they reverse so many decisions weeks later on appeal. One of the main things in terms of sort of in our paper that we have done, we've put forward some recommendations and key asks, and also some of these, you know, it's also about preventing the appeal as well. So one of the things that obviously is a concern to us is that kind of communication between the schools and the Education Authority, when there's a refusal to assess and the reason is given that the child's needs can be met from within school resources. But then that's it, that's all the Education Authority do, and there's no follow-up action or accountability on that if the school doesn't take any further action to meet those children's needs. And of course, a big part of that is the lack of access to the external support services in terms of the specialist pupil support services that are available. So that really, you know, for a lot of children, if they can't get that specialist support, then, you know, that completely puts a huge barrier to the whole support system, and inevitably will lead to appeals for some children. So it's about really making sure that a priority for review in terms of the Education Authority's review is actually to increase the capacity and the access to those pupil support services. And one of those key services, of course, is the Educational Psychology Service. And one of the things that often we see is that the Education Authority will turn down a statutory assessment because the education psychologist hasn't been involved, there's been no input there. So we would be saying, well, look, in order for you to determine whether or not you need to do an assessment, if you are saying we can't because there's no educational psychology service, then you have a duty to make sure that there will be an educational psychology input before you make that determination not to assess. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is final statement. Our findings in terms of the final statement was generally, which is, I'm sure as most of you will be very aware, the most common kind of issue is the lack of quantification and specification in terms of the SEND provision. So the failure to actually specify and quantify the SEND provision within statements and to actually make sure the statement is clear and unambiguous has obviously been a concern for a very long time, and it's a practice that we want to see, a practice that should be ending, that the Education Authority should draft specified and quantified proposed statements so that a parent can actually see exactly what's going to be in the statement, instead of waiting for a parent to ask for the statement to be quantified and then putting in the final statement, and then it's still not correct, and that inevitably will lead to an appeal. There's also some concern over the lack of description of the special education needs in Part 2. Again, that's quite important to make sure the description of needs is all adequate and everything's there, because if there's anything missing in terms of needs, then it won't be provided for in the provision. And there's obviously a huge challenge at the minute in terms of particularly special skills. So we do find that statements that are relating to where the parent has asked for a preferred special skill placement, that those appeals might be more likely to go to a hearing, because they can't, because they're basically the Education Authority cannot comply with the parent's request, and it generally is because there's such a huge issue in terms of lack of capacity in special skills and specialist placements. So again, you know, they need to be able to tackle that special skill and capacity issues, and that again would lead to fewer appeals. And one of the things that also came across in our survey, particularly in the online survey, was that parents feel that their own parental advice is not listened to, their own parental advice and recommendations are not listened to appropriately, and there's a lack of consideration in terms of the EA considering their parental advice as opposed to the professional advices. So in terms of improving things in relation to statements, obviously we want to see specified and qualified proposed statements, more accountability, in terms of one of the things that really is quite upsetting for us is that when you go through this this process of getting a better statement in place, and maybe you even go to hearing and there's a tribunal ruling and they rule on a particular SEND provision, sometimes that SEND provision is not actually implemented in the school, which kind of, you know, is it really makes that the whole process, it really compromises the whole process of appeal. So at the minute, there's no real accountability on that failure to implement statement provision in schools. So that's something that we really want to see tackled as to who is accountable for that when that happens. We would say as the Education Authority, sometimes they would say, no, we've erased the provision and it's up to the school to do it. So there's a whole issue there that needs further addressed. Again, more support from schools. Parents said they would like schools to be more supportive of them in terms of getting the provision in for the children. And of course, again, having contact with EA officers when necessary has to be improved. As I mentioned before, improved capacity within special schools will be a huge one in terms of the appeals that are relating to school placements that we see at the minute. And again, just there's a lack of adherence in terms of timeframes for finalising statements. Again, this is linked to when you go to a hearing and there has been a ruling made, maybe there's a work document has been produced, but the actual finalising of the statement is there can still be quite a lot of delay around that. So it's just about trying to make the process go a wee bit smoother, a wee bit quicker, and be a lot more effective in terms of getting support for the child. So just quickly to go through the hearing with you, obviously we had a very good presentation from Patricia there. And I think that in terms of tribunal chairs, I think we do recognise it's a very stressful forum for parents. But it was quite interesting because it within our own review and within the survey, while parents were saying that they recognise that the tribunal is a fair, equitable, independent forum, it still did not take away from how difficult and stressful it was for parents to attend the hearing. And I think it's probably the anticipation of the hearing. I think perhaps once you're there, I think it probably would be a lot more positive than maybe, you know, some people fear. And the chairs do have a responsibility to make sure that it is a much less formal forum than, yes, as a legalistic process and as a serious process. But I think in terms of actually encouraging constructive discussion, they do keep it in a less formal forum. And of course, there is also the fear that if parents are there unrepresented, there's a greater pressure on them. And perhaps in some ways they may even be disadvantaged depending on how, you know, that hearing is managed for them. There's a couple of other things in terms of the hearing. Obviously there are some organisations like yourselves who will offer free representation if we can to the hearing. There's also other organisations out there that will do that, but generally I think that there is that lag of free representation at hearing available for parents. And of course, there's no legal aid for representation available. So we would, you know, that extension of the legal aid would be very useful as well. Sometimes parents don't really know, certainly they know the Education Authority is going to be there, but there isn't really a knowledge of who all will be attending. Now there is you can request a witness list, but I think that lack of knowledge of attendees sometimes add to that anxiety of the hearing, and obviously a lack of opportunity to engage again with EA officers in terms of the hearing. There was a few views made as well in terms of adjournments, that the EA can request an adjournment without the consent of the parent, which is where the system is at the minute. So so a couple of things that has sort of been in terms of improving that situation would be to have that more equitable approach in terms of adjournments or even extensions to timeframes, extension to case statements and things like that. So that actually everybody would be consulted in respect of any adjournments. And as I say, a witness list would be very useful to be produced, just a standard practice before the hearing rather than the parent having to ask for it. Again, as I say, increasing availability of free representation and extension of the legal aid. And obviously throughout all of this system, more availability and capacity within the EA to speak to parents. So just one more slides for you, and then we're done. So just you can see there just a few things in terms of trying to improve the system. I think, you know, that greater collaboration between all the parties, I think, would be very useful throughout all stages of the process. A huge one is the EA increasing their capacity to respond to inquiries, keep parents updated and engage with parents. And interestingly, 98% of our online respondents to our survey said that they viewed free advice and representation as either extremely important or very important. So I think that that's the thing for government as well, to look at, certainly in terms of even our own sector or the statutory, whether or not there can be any increased availability for free advice, and particularly for representation at a hearing. So in terms of what we're going to do with this, if there's any real issues there that you feel that we have missed out, now this has just been a summary, obviously our paper is a lot more comprehensive, but if there's any real issues that you feel we've missed out on, then please, you know, bring that to your attention. And this will be any sort of thoughts or kind of particularly in respect of any solutions or recommendations you think, we will share those with the Education Authority, but will of course all be anonymous, no quotes or anything like that, or any kind of nothing will be actually attributed to any particular person. So they'll all be certainly anonymized, but we will share it with the Education Authority, because they do need to know what you know, as much feedback that we can give them as possible. They are, as I say, they are jointly working with the Department of Education and the Department of Health to put together a SEND improvement plan over the next couple of years. So that will be reviewing everything to do with the SEND process, the pupil support services, education psychology service, all of those things they will review, and will be putting in place some efforts to improve that. And I would say to you just to keep a wee eye to the website, and if they are offering any events or activities for parents to participate in, then certainly I would encourage you to do that. And just to say, we will also keep you updated in terms of our own social media and our own website. So so that, as I say, is a quick run through of what we have done recently, and that will also be available on our paper that we'll do, will also be available on our website. So okay, so that's our presentations done. So I know that's a huge amount